This video will be a continuation of the last video here on the channel, which was an overview of limiter artifacts. So today, me and Thomas are going to listen to some examples involving the look-ahead on the limiter, and we're going to discuss that. And hopefully, at the end of the video, you will be able to set your look-ahead in a good way.
Yeah.
When it comes to compression, we are often after the artifacts because they shape the sound in good ways. But for limiting, we're almost always, with some exceptions, looking to minimize artifacts. So we keep this in mind as we now go into this example.
And the main duty of a peak limiter is to keep every sample below the threshold level. And this means that the limiter needs to be able to reduce the gain very quickly. And this can sometimes cause audible distortion. And a common solution to avoid distortion is to let the limiter peak into the future and reduce the gain more gently ahead of a loud peak. And many limiters let you set this look-ahead time.
We can also say that the short look-ahead tends to cause distortion because there is simply not enough time to reduce the peaks in a gentle way. And the long look-ahead can make the transient sound softer. So these are the two artifacts or side effects that we are balancing when it comes to the look-ahead. And depending on the music, you will probably prefer one over the other, but the best thing is to avoid both of them. So short look-ahead, distortion, long look-ahead, softening of transients. That shows up especially like how distinct the kick and the snare sound. That's a way of listening for it.
Yeah, and it's a very exaggerated example to make these side effects more audible here on YouTube. We wouldn't recommend using this much peak limiting on this mix, but it can be a good strategy for learning what the side effects sound like to make it exaggerated. Yeah.
So you have the original in the middle there, and we have on top there is a short look-ahead version, and then we have the long look-ahead version at the bottom. And this is our monitor controller on the side that we developed ourselves and been using for 15 years. Actually, this is in beta, so we have a small test group so that we can get this out in the future. Yeah. But it's in beta version 3 at the moment. But then we can choose what to listen for with the 3 buttons.
So these different versions go into each of these buttons.
Yeah.
So we can hear how they sound. And the main thing with this is that it's loudness matched. So when we switch between these 3 versions, there is no difference in loudness.
Yeah, there are other ways to do this as well. If you don't have a monitor controller, you can get around listening loudness matched. But in general, since this is a limiter we're using, the original and the limited versions are going to have different levels. So comes in quite handy. But then also, actually, the 2 versions with the different look-aheads actually also have a little bit of a loudness difference here.
Yeah.
So we kind of compensate for that as well if we want to switch between those 2.
So let's have a listen and now focus on the kick and the snare. Especially the snare sounds very different in these 2 different versions. So let's have a listen.
Yeah, so we can take an extra listen now between the short look-ahead and the original, how the track gets more distortion with the short look-ahead. We zoom in on that first.
Yeah, listen to the crunchiness of the kick and the snare.
Yeah, compared to the original that is not limited.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's quite crunchy in the limited version.
Yeah, when it goes overboard, it's like a gravel on top of the mix.
If we have focused our hearing on that, then it will be more obvious to hear how that is missing in the version with too long look ahead. Here we can hear that the kick and the snare sounds much duller, and in the case of the snare, it's sort of disappearing into the mix. You can have a listen. Yeah, so the kick and especially the snare gets a much more smooth and not as present sound, I think.
Yeah, it kind of falls back a little bit.
Yeah.
Or press down more. We can listen between the first and the third. The two extremes.
Yeah.
So somewhere in between these two settings of the look ahead will be your correct setting, or maybe what you prefer.
Yeah, we can hear an example of when the look ahead is more in the right place. Sounds like this. Now the kick and snare are still quite present in the mix, and they still have that sort of clear quality without getting too crunchy.
And the side effects will usually show up a little bit different depending on the material. So that's why we always say use your ears when it comes to these settings.
Yeah, and that's also why we don't really talk about the exact numbers that we are using, the exact settings, because that will differ for different material and that will differ for different limiters and so on. The important thing is to listen and find these extreme settings. This is too short and this is too long, and then you sort of tune your ears to hear when it's just right.
To contradict that, we can say that the short look ahead was 0.02 milliseconds and the long look ahead was about 4 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to find a setting that works for the whole song, though. So we can't find that sweet spot because it's like we have an example here where we go from an aggressive part of the song to a more quiet part of the song, and then they need kind of different treatment. You can see if you catch what happens in the quiet part.
Yeah.
And now we're using such an aggressive limiting here. That's way too much. But overall, the distortion that comes from the look ahead that is very short, it's kind of masked a little bit in the more aggressive part. But then when we go to the quiet part, it shows up.
Yeah. And if you have trouble hearing it, then it can sometimes be easier to hear it when listening to the side signal, the difference signal. will usually show up there more
Yeah.
easily. So how do we solve this then? Well, we would really need to have different settings for the aggressive part and for the more quiet part. So that's something that we can do with automation. And to do this, you will need a limiter that lets you change the look ahead in real time without adding additional noises or crackle, things like that. And some limiters do that. But this limiter, the Limitless plugin from DMG Audio, works very well for this. So let's listen how it sounds when we automate the look ahead. So now we can keep the aggressive setting during the aggressive part, and then we have a more soft setting for the sustained guitar part. And there are other ways to do this as well. And of course, there is always the option to use less peak limiting, and that's often the best solution if it's possible.
So that's it for today. Good luck with your current projects, and thank you for watching.